Hey there, and welcome to this week's edition of CleanTechnica's news broadcasts. Now, before we get started, we just wanted to quickly remind you that on April 29th, Tesla is going to be holding its quarterly investor call. Now, in case you didn't know it, CleanTechnica, we always live stream that investor call, and we're the only ones to add extra context to this audio-only call. Things like, who is this investor? What does he think of Tesla? Was that a bonehead question? And what was the question again? We make sure that you guys know the score. And now somewhere in this corner of the screen, there will be a little pop-up. That is the link to our live stream. Now make sure to open that and click the set reminder button. That way you'll get a notification when we start the live stream, as well as a little reminder half an hour before that. Now we start our live stream between 15 to 30 minutes before the actual call, and during that time we display slides, courtesy of Hypercharts, that show the newest information from the quarterly update letter in handy graphs that compare it to the previous quarters, so you know how Tesla is doing and how that compares to previous quarters. In any case, I hope to see you guys during the live stream on the 29th, and now let's get to the news. Gigafactory, Nevada. This week we start off with Tesla, and to be specific, the Gigafactory. It's actually been closed for a while now, and the Panasonic side was the first one to announce the suspension of their operations on March 20th, and then Tesla on their side followed suit on the 27th. Now, today we find out that the Gigafactory is slated to be reopened on May 4th with some very strict new guidelines to avoid spread of the virus. This includes things like temperature screenings upon entrance, use of masks, making sure people adhere to the social distancing guidelines, as well as a separation of workstations where possible. And in locations that it's not possible, there's going to be some kind of slowdown in production. Now, if any employee is diagnosed with the virus, I mean, they're obviously not going to continue working, but also all the colleagues they came in contact with will be asked to self-quarantine. Cybertruck. In a tweet that Elon Musk recently replied to, he clarified that the Cybertruck will not only be able to cross streams, but also float for a while. This is actually something we've seen Tesla owners do for years now. They were able to cross flooded areas that no other ICE vehicle could. In a much older tweet, Elon even mentioned that the cars are programmed to spin their wheels differently to provide thrust in shallow water, although he said that it's not recommended. Though in this case, it seems that the Cybertruck is Tesla's first vehicle that can actually cross streams and shallow water, and that actually being a feature and not something that is not recommended. It's kind of funny actually how the front of the Cybertruck slightly resembles that underwater Lotus that was used in a James Bond movie. And actually Elon even ended up buying that Lotus and was later disappointed that it cannot actually swim underwater like a submarine. Now, it's actually a bit of a question, what can the Cybertruck be upgraded to, considering in this tweet he said that the pressurized version of the Cybertruck will be the official truck of Mars. Andrej Karpathy. You remember Andrej Karpathy from Tesla, right? He's one of the people who presented during Tesla Autonomy Investor Day, talk about AI and all the corner cases. Here, maybe this image will jog your memory. So while this was only posted online on April 20th, this actually took place at the end of February. Andrej, he spoke at the Scaled Machine Learning Conference. Now, is anything fundamentally new revealed? Well, no, not really, but he did help us understand and visualize the struggles within the Tesla Autopilot team, what they do, what kind of problems they face, and here are some key takeaways from that presentation. Creating full self-driving is a pretty difficult job that could be done by an ever-expanding team of hundreds of programmers. But really, the Autopilot team is an elite team that consists of approximately 20 people, or so Andrej says. And that sounds about right, because I actually witnessed an Autopilot meeting. I stood 5 meters away from that room. Elon walked by, said, "Hey, sorry, don't have time, gotta go into this Autopilot meeting." And yeah, it was a bit of a glass room, so we could see inside, big square table and like 15 to 20 people. So that was the Autopilot team. And then within 15 seconds, people pushed us out of the way saying, please don't distract Elon. In any case, the point is that Tesla is trying to make an AI that can learn on its own. They literally try to automate any kind of process that they can, because if they just keep branching out, they're going to run out of good programmers really quickly.
And we're trying to develop as much automation machinery to actually support the development of these new features and new tasks. And we're removing engineers from that loop, so they're not involved. We're just building out infrastructure, and then we have a data labeling team and PMs and so on that can actually use that infrastructure to create new detectors.
During the presentation, Andrej gave one big example of autopilot training for full self-driving: stop signs. First of all, they would need a database full of millions of images or videos of stop signs.
And so basically there's a massive variety of, even just for a stop sign, to get this to work. And what we do day to day in the team is we are going through the long tail and we're building all this infrastructure for sourcing all these additional examples.
So they then instruct their million-plus Tesla vehicles out there to gather this data and send it to Tesla.
We have the biggest data set for accept right turn on stops. I'm basically certain of that. We again create a detector for this, and then we get a noisy stream from the fleet of cars encountering accept right turn on stops, and then we can label that, incorporate into a training set. We have tens of thousands of these. I'm not actually 100% sure how you build out a data set like this without the fleet.
They then train the AI with the data they have gathered. Then they deploy the result of that in shadow mode, and any corner cases that pop up will then be reviewed. Now, an example was, for example, when the vehicle sees a stop sign only when it gets close, but for some reason not when it was further away. Strange corner case. Why? They find out why, they train more of these corner cases, and then they see the accuracy go from something like 40% to 99%.
So occluded signs, we would build out a test set first. We see that we're failing on occluded signs, and then once we have the tests and we're failing them, we then spin the data engine on occluded signs, and then we see that the percent pass goes from 40% to 99% or something like that, and then we're confident that this is actually working relatively well.
Then one more thing that we already knew but we didn't have very nicely visualized is how Tesla currently takes the output of all their cameras and stitches that together into one big 360 camera before starting to process what the car actually saw. Here's the visualization of that. On the right is what Autopilot thought the curbs of the intersection looked like before. On the left is what it actually is. And the middle one is the current prediction based off of the 360 camera. Keep in mind that this is a fairly recent improvement. And before we move on, let me just quickly point out this tweet by ARK Invest's Sam Corris that Elon replied to. Handling edge cases in autonomy. Waymo. Pray that it's in the data library. Simulated with every variation the creativity of your team can come up with, and hope it reflects the real world. Tesla. Just tell the fleet to collect data on the topic. Train on that real world data, validate it in shadow mode, and deploy. Elon confirmed it. Climate change. We have heard a lot of unfortunate news come from the Arctic over the past few years, but as methods for calculating ice loss are improving, the future is starting to sound ever more dire. According to these latest predictions, total ice loss in the Arctic summers will definitely happen at some point before 2050, even if we do dramatically cut our current emissions. There is a bit of a glimmer of hope there, though. There is a tipping point that has not yet been passed, and if we do cut our emissions drastically, there is still a chance that the ice will recover over time. These results are based off of 40 latest state-of-the-art computer models. However, even without those computer models, one thing we already know is that on average, the Arctic ice has decreased by 40% in area and 70% in volume. This is actually somewhat a positive feedback loop because ice, it reflects sunlight and helps the situation, while the dark ocean actually absorbs light and increases the warming. And just so everyone's clear, a positive feedback loop, in this case positive, is bad. A big question is, when are we going to have the first ice-free summer? Now, every model has their own answers, and according to some outliers, it could even be as soon as just in a couple of years, which is incredible, but it's certainly going to happen before 2050. But the real reason that we are including this story today is because there are some other predictions here that we have never heard before that are totally unprecedented. The real surprising part, however, is what can happen in Arctic winters rather than in Arctic summers. According to the study, if we don't cut our emissions drastically, there's even a chance that we will have total ice-free Arctic winters. And that would be totally catastrophic for all the wildlife around there that lives and hunts around the ice and wouldn't survive without it. There is hope to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, but not all of them, not anymore. And I think that our current predicament that the world is in right now with COVID-19 and the lockdowns is the perfect example of this. Because the COVID-19, it is not the worst case scenario. I mean, the flu in 1918 killed not 4%, but 30% of all the people it infected. But even this 4% already turned our world upside down. So we really don't need the worst effects of climate change to make everyone on Earth absolutely miserable. And I think not enough people get that. Keystone XL pipeline. In today's news, the people dealt the North American oil industry a pretty serious blow. This defeat has to do with the heavily protested Keystone XL pipeline. This proposed pipeline would be 1,179 miles and go from Canada all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And it was going to go through some tribal lands as well as some pretty vulnerable ecosystems. And so basically the US court just revoked a key permit that they needed to complete this pipeline. And it was revoked because they didn't do any kind of impact assessment on endangered species. At this point, considering that the world already has more oil than it needs, and we may have even hit peak oil, it doesn't make sense to continue to expand oil infrastructure, and yet they keep going. This news today unfortunately does not actually stop the construction of the pipeline, which was only started approximately 1 month ago. Shell. Yep, Royal Dutch Shell, they want to go net zero by 2050. That's at least what they're saying, but what they mean by that might not be exactly what you're expecting. There's a long version, but I'm just going to try to go with the short version here. First off, they're going to continue drilling. They're actually going to drill even more than they are right now. So what exactly are they going to offset? Well, they're going to offset the emissions caused by drilling, as well as the emissions caused by their direct operations. All of that is less than 15%. Offsetting all the emissions that are actually caused by people using their own products, well, that's basically their own problem, or as Shell so eloquently put it, and I quote here, customers can and will themselves take action on the emissions created by their use of our energy products. What a scapegoat. Although afterwards they did add this. As we get closer to 2050, we will work ever more intensely with customers who still have emissions that they have not fully mitigated. To find ways to help them do so, that might be through actions they take themselves, or we may agree to mitigate those emissions on their behalf. And they then list 2 potential options like planting trees as well as using carbon capture technology. Now, we must admit this is the biggest step any oil manufacturer has taken thus far, and it is a step in the right direction. To us, however, the plan does sound somewhat unrealistic. Let's call it a pipe dream. It seemed logical to continue this with a story about carbon capture. According to the Paris Agreement, we need to keep the world from warming more than 2 degrees and do our very best to make sure it stays under 1.5 degrees. That is probably not enough, but that's a whole other discussion. The Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute has made an analysis of the commitments made by countries in the Paris Agreement, and their analysis reveals that they are not on track to achieving their goals. They argue that carbon capture and storage technology needs to be part of the solution. So far, there are 19 carbon capture plants in operation. There are 4 under construction and 28 under various stages of development. Now, altogether, these 51 plants, when they will be all operational, would together pull out 96 million tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere per year. Now, how much is that? That is approximately 0.27% of what the world emitted in 2016. That's not a lot. According to The Guardian, the Carbon Capture and Storage Institute estimated that the world would need approximately 2,500 carbon capture and storage plants around the world in order to close the gap and meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accords. We were unable to verify that number on short notice, but assuming that it's accurate, a fairly simple calculation shows that without an increase in efficiency, that would only absorb approximately 16% of the emissions made in 2016. And at that rate, it would take 241 years to erase the emissions between 1971 and 2016, which is a bit too long. However, considering the fact that there are enormous greenhouse gas reserves in places like permafrost and deep under the ocean that are emitting ever more CO2 than before, we won't just need to collect and reverse all man-made pollution. Sadly, the IPCC report doesn't even yet properly account for permafrost and a lot of other huge potential tipping points. Ford, they are extending the shutdowns of their factories indefinitely. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to reopen again. It simply means that they don't know yet when they're going to be able to open, and they don't want to guess and put their money on some kind of date and be wrong again. There is, however, one plant that is about to reopen, and that is because they're going to start manufacturing ventilators for COVID-19 patients. And all of the people at this factory who are making the ventilators, they will all be volunteers. But they are getting paid. That is something, there was some confusion about that earlier. They are getting paid. Porsche. Porsche has released its sales numbers for Q1 2020. We now know that the company sold 1,391 Porsche Taycans this quarter. And that's actually quite a lot. But what's more interesting is that the company is claiming that they will be able to fulfill all 15,000 pre-orders by the end of this year, which means they're about to significantly ramp up their production. If you ditch the S-curve for a moment and just divide the remaining orders by the remaining 3 quarters, they would basically have to produce 4,536 Taycans per quarter, which is a lot more than they did in the first quarter. And basically to achieve that, they would have to double their production every single quarter until they reach 8,000 vehicles per quarter in Q4. It's certainly not impossible considering that Porsche produces between 8,500 and 18,500 vehicles depending on the model. However, their inexperience with EVs could cause some setbacks. Land Rover. Land Rover just announced 2 new plug-in hybrid electric vehicle variants, one for the Evoque and one for the Discovery Sport. Both vehicles will be getting a 15 kilowatt-hour battery, and because of the battery, they'll be able to travel around 41 miles, which is 66 kilometers, and that's for the Evoque. And the Discovery Sport will have a little less range at 38.5 miles, 62 kilometers. And also, both vehicles will be able to hit highway speeds without any issues on battery power alone because it has an 80 kilowatt hour electric motor. Although driving at that speed will kill the range a lot quicker. The vehicles can recharge within half an hour if they use a 32 kilowatt hour DC fast charger, and if they use a 7 kilowatt hour AC home charger box, they will be able to recharge in 1 hour and 24 minutes. Volkswagen. The Volkswagen's ID3 user manual has been leaked, and with it we found out some pretty interesting features. Let's start with something that are either unlockable premium features or simply features that are not available in some regions. The manual mentions something called WeConnect and includes the following things: driving data, vehicle status, vehicle health report, parking position, and service scheduling. Then there is also WeConnect Plus that has programming departure times, charging, air conditioning, Apple Music, title, charging stations, online map update, online route calculation, online POI search, online voice control, online traffic information, parking spaces, lock and unlock, and internet radio. Now this list is a bit confusing since some of the pretty basic functions like charging, air conditioning, locking and unlocking the vehicle, those can't be premium features. Those are literally some of the most basic features you could possibly have. And so I'm wondering if being able to access and do these things remotely, like with a smartphone, could that potentially be the premium feature here? Then some other things in this list that don't really make sense are Apple Music and Tidal. Now, either Spotify and Google Play Music are unsupported, or they're available for free, and for some reason only Apple Music and Tidal are premium paid features. One thing is for sure, this has nothing to do with your smartphone, since, all those apps are available already on there for various prices. This has something to do with the car, and those previous features we mentioned, those had something to do with the phone, so it's quite confusing. Then it seems Volkswagen is also planning on offering mobile data packages, and as an example, they give 2 gigabytes, which really is not all that much considering people quite often listen to new music on Spotify or internet radio. You're going to go through that 2 gigabytes for sure within less than a month. So either they're going to offer more, but it would still be weird if you couldn't just use the internet from your smartphone, or be able to insert some kind of SIM card, or simply be able to pay for internet features like you do with a Tesla. It seems like a bit of a weird system. Also, in case anyone was wondering, the car does have Apple CarPlay as well as Android Auto, so that's useful at least. Then 3 features that they sort of seem to be borrowing from Tesla. The first would be video mode, where you can watch some kind of videos either from what they're calling a data medium, which is probably a USB or a hard drive, from the internal memory, which is pretty interesting. I wonder how big the hard drive on a Volkswagen ID3 is, or from streaming services, which probably includes something like Netflix, although they didn't name any names in there. What was pretty unusual is that, well, actually what is normal is that you can only watch the videos while stationary. But what's pretty unusual is that while driving, you cannot watch movies, but you can still listen to them. So that's kind of unusual. I just hope they don't pick a movie with explosions, because if you're driving and the driver suddenly gets distracted by some kind of explosion in the speakers, I think that could cause some kind of problems. I'm not sure if that's very smart, but maybe we misunderstood what the user manual said, but we'll see. It's something to keep an eye on. Then the second feature that the ID3 seems to be borrowing from Tesla is auto lane change, where on the highway, on cruise control, the ID3 can overtake a slower car on the highway and then go merge back into the original lane. And then the third feature has to do with charging, and this is a pretty interesting one. You can make the ID3 charge more slowly. The explanation they give in the user manual is so that multiple cars can charge from the same circuit without it overloading. But one of our authors, Kyle, he actually mentioned another use for this feature. Imagine you have solar panels. You are using part of the electricity, and whatever is left over, you use to charge the vehicle so that everything you generate gets used up. That way you don't draw power from the grid. And then whatever you still need to charge, you charge with a cheaper price at night. Pretty cool. If the ID3 can do that too, that would be pretty useful. The question is how smart it would be, how easy it is to reprogram, if you can connect that to your solar panel installation somehow. Unanswered questions for later. And that was it for this week's broadcast. We hope that you guys liked it, and if you did, please consider sharing it. Our news broadcast is relatively new, and if you'd send it along to your friends that care about CleanTech, we'd appreciate it. Giving this video a thumbs up also helps us along. Now, everything that we cover in this news broadcast, we also try to write articles about, and links to those can be found and in the video description, as well as in this corner here. Do you ever see that I button popping up, the information button? That shows you what article we're currently talking about. You can press that button at any time and scroll through the list of articles that we are covering this week. Now, before we end, we also want to quickly mention again, on the 29th, we have the Tesla investor call live stream. Make sure to tune in for that. Put on the notification button. And other than that, I wish you guys a wonderful weekend and see you soon. See ya.